The next thing we're going to enter is the emission unit. And let's take a look at the little diagram we have here and see what our emission unit is. So the first emission unit is the molar number 1, and the emission unit identifier there is EU number 8. So we'll go back into TEISS, we'll click emission units, and we'll click add. TEISS puts a default unit identifier in there that we don't want, so we're going to go ahead and put the unit identifier that we want in, and that's EU8. And I'm not going to put that number sign in there because it causes issues, so we'll leave that out. The unit description is something you definitely want to enter because for your own purposes you want to know what this emission unit is without looking back into the data. So we'll enter a unit description there. The unit type code is mandatory, so let's see what we can do for this. We're going to do a search and see what we can come up with for a molar. And I'm going to click on search button, and nothing comes up. Let's try mold and see if anything comes up. So nothing again. So if nothing's coming up and you've looked through all of the codes and you can't find anything that really works, there is an unclassified type of emission unit that you can use. We'll go ahead and put that in, and that comes up as the unit type code of 999. For most purposes, we don't really want you to use this unless you really have to, and in this case, I'm thinking I really have to, so I'm going to go ahead and click unclassified. It's just better if you can actually call it something instead of just calling it unclassified, but in some cases, you might have to use it. And that's okay as long as you can limit your use of that. For the unit status code is operating. And I think that's all we've got to enter for the emission unit. And we'll go ahead and click OK to save that data. The next thing we want to enter is the unit control approach. And had there not been any unit control approach things, we wouldn't have to enter anything here. But in this case, when we look back at our PowerPoint, we can see there's a baghouse associated with this emission unit. So if there is some control equipment at the facility, you definitely want to enter that control equipment into your TEISS project. We will click Unit Control Approach and click Add. And what you want to do is enter a control approach description just for your own good. So we'll enter the baghouse CE2. Nothing is required except for first inventory year. And what first inventory year means is what is the first year that the control approach was implemented. And so I'm going to make up something. I'm going to say that we first put in that baghouse at this facility in 2011. And that is all we need to enter for this controller approach, and we'll click OK. And then we want to enter the unit control measure. And basically what this is when we click the Add button, we can see that we have to enter a control measure code. So basically that's saying, what kind of control equipment is this? So when we click on the 3 dots, we'll do a search, and you can see there's a whole bunch of different kind of control equipment that could be at this facility or at this unit. But we happen to know that this is a baghouse, so we'll go ahead and enter baghouse and do a search on that by clicking on the binoculars. So yay, that was easy to find. We've got a control device code for that, and we'll click select. That's all we need to enter for our unit control measure. And we'll click OK to save that data. So for units, for control equipment, there's 3 different things we need to enter. The next thing we need to enter is the pollutants. So this is what pollutant is controlled by this particular equipment. And you can have multiple pollutants here. You can just keep adding them one after another. For this example, I'm going to say that VOC was controlled by the baghouse. So I'll click Add, and I will put in VOC here. And then I'll see if there's anything else we need to enter, and click OK, save the data. If I want to add another pollutant, all I have to do is click Add and just put on the next pollutant that you want to add here. But that's all that I'm aware of that this baghouse controls. So that's it for the control equipment. You can also enter control equipment at the process level, and that's right down here. But you can enter it at both levels. So you either have to enter it at the unit level or at the process level, but not both. Now we will enter the process, and that's the event that occurs at the unit that causes the emissions. So we'll click on Processes, and we will click Add. And although when we look at this part of the flow diagram, there's not a process on here, but I'm going to go ahead and enter it anyways. Because most of the time you'll see your process on your flow diagram, but this particular one does not have one. But I will add it. And you'll see by default what TEISS does is it puts in the process identifier as the emission unit identifier. And I don't really want that. I'm gonna just start assigning my own identifier, and that's something you will usually have to assign. You usually don't see a process identifier value on your V forms or on your process diagrams. So use whatever method you want to use. You can use just a numbering system, or you can use number and letters. I don't really want my process description the same as my unit description, so I'm going to write in that this is molding, and then I'm going to search for my source classification code, and I'll click on my three dots to open up my search options. And there is a lot of SCCs. You definitely want to use the text to search option instead of just searching through all of them. I'm just going to enter boat, and since my binoculars is missing because of my text size, I'm just going to click enter instead of trying to find the binoculars. And that's going to bring up all of the SCCs that have something to do with boats. So we can see here that there is quite a few boat manufacturing SCCs. You'll notice that this one here is grayed out, and the reason that is grayed out is because it's no longer applicable in terms of the NEI data. If you try to select this SCC, TEISS will not let you do it because it is not used anymore. So when you see grayed out SCCs, that's what they mean. So we'll scroll to the right and see what exactly these SCCs are. And you'll see here there's a bunch of different molding SCCs, which is what we mean. There's open molding, closed molding, bag molding, lots of different moldings, and I don't know exactly what kind of molding happens at this facility, so I'm going to select the most general of all of them, which is molding and lamination operation, and click OK to go ahead and select that SCC, and that is now in my TEISS project. And let's see if there's anything else I need to enter here. No, looks good. We'll go ahead and click OK and save the data. So the next thing we need to enter is the release point apportionment. And what that tells us is what release point does these emissions go into. And if we look back at our process diagram here, we can see that it goes into the baghouse, but then it goes out of the release point SV4. So we know that all of the emissions that come from this unit go out of SV4. We can go ahead and add the release point apportionment. So this screen comes up and it already is assigning 100% of the emissions. So we don't need to change that since there's only one release point associated with this particular emission unit. So we're going to click the down arrow button to select the release point identifier. And had you had multiple release points at this facility, they would all show up in this list. but we only have one so far, so that's the one that we're going to select because that is, according to the process diagram, the release point for this emission unit. So we'll select it, and I just double clicked on it to select it. And we'll click OK to save the data. Process control, as I mentioned before, we can only enter either the unit control or the process control. So we're not going to enter anything there. We're not going to enter the reporting period because we don't actually have emissions data for this facility. This is only from the process flow diagram, so we're not going to enter the reporting period. But if we did, we would have entered it here. So what I want to do now is enter the data for the next emission unit. So let's take a look at the diagram. And the next emission unit on the list is EU number 9 for the molder number 2. So as you can see, the molder number 2 is very similar to molder number 1. It bends to the same baghouse and to the same release point. And really the only things different about this emission unit is its identifier, which is EU9, and its description of molder number 2. So what I want to do here is clone emission unit 8 in TEISS. So we'll go back into TEISS and do that. So what we want to do is we want to go back to the emission unit and click on it. And we want to make sure that the emission unit is selected, and that means it's highlighted in blue. Had it not been selected, we could just click on it and that would highlight it in blue. And then what we want to do is we want to clone it. And this is the cloning options here. There's 2 options. There is copy selected entities and copy selected entities with children. And the one I would recommend using is selected entities with children, because what this will do is it will copy everything under the emission unit. So it will copy the control approach, the process, if you had entered a reporting period, and the emissions, it would copy all of that data. So we'll do that. So we'll clone by clicking the copy selected entities with children. And you won't see anything happening except that the paste button will become active. So we can now paste that into our TEISS project by clicking on it, and that's going to paste what we just copied as the new emission unit. So we'll do that, and now you'll see there's a new emission unit in our project. And what it does is it assigns its own unit identifier to it, so we'll go in there and change that by clicking on the edit button. And we're going to change this to the number that was in the process diagram, and that was EU9, and we're going to change our unit description to molder 2. And that's all we need to change. And we'll go ahead and click OK. And now, if we look, we can see that this is for emission unit 9. It copied all of this information that we wanted it to copy. It copied the control equipment, it copied the process, it copied the release point apportionment. So that's what we wanted to see. And you can keep doing that cloning, pasting, and editing process for the other emission units in the molder line. I'm not going to show it because it's repetitive, but you can keep doing that if you have multiple emission units that are similar. But keep in mind that if you clone the emission unit after entering the emissions, those emissions are also going to be copied. So if your emissions are different for that unit, you need to go into those emissions by clicking down here, the emissions, and actually changing those by clicking the edit icon.